Shalom Avracha. Yitzchak Avinu is very exceptional in the sense of the three forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avraham Avinu has three whole parashiyos dedicated to everything that he did, to the initiatives that he took, to setting up the nation of Klal Yisrael in its family version. Yaakov Avinu takes that family version of Klal Yisrael and brings it to its destiny, and therefore he also has many parashiyos that are dedicated to explaining how Yaakov Avinu brought this about until he had 12 Shvatim in their place, and then of course his exile to Egypt. Yitzchak Avinu is really exceptional. On the one hand, he has only one parashiyah, Parashas Toldot, and on the other hand, he's predominantly passive. He doesn't actually do very much. In the Akedah, he's the object of the Akedah. He's the one that's nekad, but he doesn't actually do anything. Even in giving the brachos, handing on to the next generation, he's passive in the sense that he's old and he's blind and he doesn't get to decide who he gives the brachos to. As it were, he gives the brachos unwittingly. He gives them to Yaakov when he thinks that it's actually Esau. What does Yitzchak do in Parashas Toldot? What's the significance of his ma'asim? What Yitzchak Avinu does is he carries on the legacy of Avraham Avinu into the future generations by essentially copying the life of Avraham Avinu. He goes down to Gerar like Avraham Avinu went down to Mitzrayim. He uses the same ruse that Avraham Avinu used in denying that Sarah was his wife, so also Yitzchak denies that Rivka is his wife, and he gets into the same trouble that Avraham Avinu got into with Avimelech, and over here with Avimelech, the king of Gerar. And he's very successful in his business, in his endeavors, in his wealth, just like Avraham Avinu. Meaning, what Yitzchak Avinu does is try to emulate his father, to pass on that legacy. He's successful, and he digs exactly the same wells that Avraham Avinu dug. He digs them, and he gives them the same names. Meaning, he transmits. And this is Klal Yisrael for many centuries, for many millennia. We have the establishment of Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim and Eretz Yisrael. We have the destiny of Klal Yisrael in the latter years of Klal Yisrael when they return to Eretz Yisrael, and in Yirtzeh Hashem we should be zeicha to the Geula Shlema b'mhira b'yameinu. But in all of those years in the middle, the job, the task of Klal Yisrael is to transmit the tradition, the legacy from parents to children, from ancestors to progeny. Just like Yitzchak Avinu, that's the basic role of Klal Yisrael. And Yitzchak Avinu has one very original encounter, and that's the encounter with Avimelech. Avimelech goes to Yitzchak Avinu and tells him, you know what? You're too successful. Lech me'imanu ki otzamta mimenu me'od. You've become successful. It rings a bell. This is very reminiscent of Paroi with Klal Yisrael, that it says in Am Bnei Yisrael, Rav ve'atzum mimenu, has become too powerful. Yitzchak Avinu, in representing the many years, the long centuries, millennia of Klal Yisrael in its intermediate stage, in the stage of Golus. The Ramban says Klal Yisrael is represented by Yitzchak going into Golus in Gerar, just like Maaseh Avos, Siman Labanim. And Am Yisrael and Yitzchak Avinu is confronted by the phenomenon that we know as anti-Semitism. Klal Yisrael, just like Yitzchak, the minority, is weak and yet is successful. And this allows Klal Yisrael, just like Yitzchak, to be prey, to be convenient prey for its haters, for its distractors. And that's why, just like Yitzchak Avinu, what's his reaction to Avimelech's aggression? He goes, Vayelech Yitzchak, Vayelech Misham Yitzchak, Vayacha benachal Gerar vayeshev sham. He goes somewhere else and he settles there. This is exactly Klal Yisrael throughout its history, throughout its sojourns in the long exile, going from one place to another, until something happens, something new. Yitzchak Avinu returns. He's strong enough, he has enough power to return to his initial place, to Be'er Sheva. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to him once again, and then the Ramban says that just like Avraham Avinu was strong enough with an army fighting the wars against the Malachim, so Yitzchak is strong enough to fend off Avimelech and to force Avimelech into striking a covenant with him, to make a bris, a covenant of peace. And there, Yitzchak Avinu is able to dig his own wells and to enjoy his own sovereignty over his own small domain in a family sense. This is very much Maisa Avos Simen Labonim. Through many years, Am Yisrael suffered a state of powerlessness in Golus. They had to roam, they had to move on from one to another, from one host nation to another, being exiled from one place to the other place over a long period of exile. This is Yitzchak Avinu in Grar. Ultimately, and Baruch Hashem, our condition today is a condition where we're able to stand up for ourselves. We have a degree of power. We have sovereignty over Israel, over Eretz Israel, a large part of it. And we're also strong, even in other host nations. We're able to stand up for rights. We're able to stand up for who we are. But Yitzchak also teaches us something in a personal level. Sometimes, even within Klal Yisrael, we're forced into a position where we have to sound an unpopular voice as individuals, as communities. Not everything that we wish to say are a voice or a message that the majority of Klal Yisrael wish to accept. And this can put ourselves into a compromised, into a difficult, inconvenient position. Yitzchak Avinu teaches us that when we find ourselves in a minority, expressing a position which is forceful and important and successful, this can compromise our own security, our own space. And we can do one of two things: either to move on, to move somewhere else, and continuing to be true to our principles, firm in our beliefs, continuing to sound that voice, but from a different perspective, a different place. Or we can try to amass that strength that will enable us to continue to saying those principles that we believe in, those principles that we receive from Avraham Avinu, from Klal Yisrael throughout the generations, and be true and firm in those principles, but to state them, to be true to them from a position of strength. Halavai that we should be able to do so, to really be true, firm in our beliefs, in our principles, to do what Klal Yisrael has done throughout the years of transmitting the truth that we believe in from one generation to the other, and the Halavai that we should be able to return, like Yitzchak Avinu to Beersheba, and ultimately like Yaakov Avinu, in a state of completion of the family of Klal Yisrael, so to us in a national sense, to reach the Geula and the Nachalot, to reach the final Geula of Klal Yisrael, B'mheimri Beredu, and to be really an Or L'Goyim, to be able to preach, to speak our message, not just internally, but even to the nations of the world. We should all have a beautiful Shabbos.